Hello, I'm Annie Gosfield, speaking to you from New York's fabulous East Village. I'd like to thank Tanya Leone, Amy Frawley, Marcello Di Russo, and Composers Now for giving me the opportunity to talk about music with three of my favorite composers. Jessie Cox, Theresa Wong, and Carl Stone have each followed their own path and developed their own distinctive sound, incorporating a very personal mix of approaches and techniques. I'm happy to have them here to discuss their backgrounds, play their music, and reveal to us how taking their own path has led them to where they are today. I'll also be talking about my own music. My background is also the product of intertwined paths. When I was a kid, I never would have guessed that I would grow up to compose an opera about Martians or write a duet for violin and jammed radio signals. I started my musical journey like a lot of other kids. I took piano lessons and I listened to a lot of records. I also listened to a lot of noise. I was always fascinated by detuned radios, machine sounds, surface noise on scratchy records, and static from the TV after sign-off, if you can remember that. I love to get lost in the slowly shifting abstract textures. I also grew up hearing a lot of great music, thanks to my folks who revered Duke Ellington, Django Reinhardt, Bessie Smith, and my older brothers who listened voraciously to rock and blues. There was always wonderful music in the house, but it was never classical music. So when I went on to study piano and composition, I really didn't have a lot of preconceived notions. You could say that as a child, I was never properly inoculated against classical music. At the age of 19, when I was in college, I got restless and wanted to make some noise with other people. So I started my own band called Planet Z in the lively punk and new wave scene that was happening in LA's Chinatown. I loved being able to write and perform my own music, and I loved collaborating with like-minded musicians. Later, in the 90s, I picked up and I moved to downtown New York, just a stone's throw away from the old knitting factory. It was a really exciting time. The East Village was exploding with new music. I divided my time between improvising, writing, playing with my own group, and composing for ensembles that played notated music. I was even in the pit for Him, Christopher Walken's bizarre play about Elvis Presley. In 2017, I composed War of the Worlds, a collaboration with the great opera director Yuval Sharon. It was based on Orson Welles' 1938 radio drama about Martians attacking the Earth. The premise for our concert at Disney Hall was a song cycle in honor of the 100th anniversary of The Planets by Gustav Holst, that old chestnut. My New Planet cycle kicked off our concert, which was narrated by Sigourney Weaver and performed by the Los Angeles Philharmonic until we were interrupted repeatedly and rudely by an ongoing Martian attack. After all, it was War of the Worlds. In 2022, I finally got to finish that interrupted song cycle. It started out as just a ruse, a funny premise to open the concert, but I had such a ball writing it that when the LA Phil offered me the opportunity to actually complete the song cycle, how could I refuse? So I wrote the music and libretto for The Secret Life of Planets, a 35-minute song cycle that shifts through a galaxy of interplanetary moods. It reflected my own varied musical background. It was written for orchestral musicians, so it's in notated form for the most part, but it also uses improvisation, dance music, noisy recordings of outer space, and draws more from kind of a twisted imaginary popular music than from the European art song tradition. There are wild extended vocal techniques being performed alongside a crooner wearing a tuxedo, like something out of a surreal film noir. I used found sound, an important element in my work, in the form of interplanetary recordings made by NASA. I composed the song cycle during the height of the lockdown, when a lot of us spent our evenings gazing out into the night sky. I came to think of the planets as my faraway companions in that lonely time, and I wrote songs that cast each one in human form. I imagined a ragtag bunch that, like us, were flawed, eccentric, lonely, and harbored secrets. Jupiter swung like a big wrecking ball. Venus sang about Planet Z and whispered about Elvis's bisexuality. Saturn scattered debris like smoke from a cigarette. Here's an excerpt from The Secret Life of Planets in a mini opera version. It's edited from sections of several different songs. My thanks to the LA Phil, singers Hila Plitman and James Hayden, and the conductor, David Bloom. As an instrumentalist, I've played all kinds of keyboards: piano, pipe organ, analog synths. I've lugged electric pianos up the back stairs of plenty of sleazy clubs. But the instrument that I really found myself on was my first sampling keyboard. For me, it was the best of both worlds. I could capture all kinds of weird sounds, then play them back while I'm playing an instrument. When digital sampling became affordable, it gave me a sound medium that I could mold like clay and then perform live, using a keyboard without losing the tactile, physical approach of playing a piano. A lot of my music uses machine samples. Many of them were recorded during a life-changing residency that I had, deep in the factories of Nuremberg, Germany, that was sponsored by the Siemens Foundation. I've also done a lot of work with samples of jammed radio signals from the Cold War and World War II that I researched at a radio archive during a fellowship at the American Academy in Berlin. I've sampled cement mixers, analog synths, broken pianos, a lot of things that were too heavy to move. I use the samples for most everything: composition, improvisation, and songs that I write for my own band. Speaking of which, here's a piece called Rattling Beeps and Surging Sweeps. It was part of a set of songs I wrote for the Ecstatic Music Festival that were inspired by instrumental 45s. From Johnny Guitar Watson's Space Guitar to the Bar-Kays Soul Finger, I'm crazy about those instrumental dance numbers. I'm playing what started as samples of an old Surge synthesizer here, which I reimagined as kind of a fantasy space-age fuzz organ. Joining me are guitarist Roger Klyer and drummer Billy Martin. Long waves and random pulses is another example of my work using a sampler. It's fully notated and couples violin with jammed radio signals, a sonic phenomenon used to block radio transmissions in World War II. This is a recording of the premiere, performed by Monica Germino, who the piece was written for, at Paradiso in Amsterdam. The piece has had a life of its own. It's also been recently recorded by Pauline Kim Harris and performed by Midori in an all-acoustic version. Hello, Carl Stone.
Hello, Annie Gosfield.
Welcome. Thank you for having this chat with us.
It's great to be able to communicate with you through the bit stream.
So, Carl, I was fortunate enough to see one of the last tours in your 70th birthday extravaganza world tour. And all of the music was great, but one thing that really struck me was how your music for solo electronics has developed over the decades, that you've dedicated a large part of your life to this, recording both in the studio and performing live. And one thing that I found really interesting is the live performance has gotten so much more lively. I don't know if this was a conscious decision, but I don't know. I've been seeing you play for so many years. It's been really fun, not only seeing it develop, but there's this sense of kind of opening up as well.
I think the music itself has developed, and not through really a conscious decision, but just kind of natural evolution or kind of shift into more active, more rhythmic, shorter forms, and something that if you're not paying strict attention to the regularity of the beats, something you could dance to. And so I think that's one of the reasons. And also because now I've adapted a performance a practice where I can stand and perform. And I didn't really anticipate that this would make such a big difference in the way people took in the music, but it seems like it has. So that somebody sitting at a table in front of a computer where they could be, the old cliche is, oh, they could be doing their email. Well, I guess I was sort of true. And then nonetheless, even though I mean, it may have appeared to be, I wasn't actually doing my email, I was performing. And then now, at least for some of the music I've developed, I can use an iPad as a controller. So I'm not just sitting at a table. And for whatever reason, people can relate to this a little bit more.
I'm interested in how your work has developed over the years, but also how you got there in the first place. And if you're classically trained or interested in electronics from the very beginning, or maybe took piano lessons.
Well, I did take piano lessons when I was very young, but it didn't really go anywhere. I didn't have the discipline to practice, and I didn't enjoy it. So I wasn't very good, but I did listen to a lot of music, and my parents supported me by giving me a lot of records. Um, and the music that I liked as a child ranged from folk music, kind of what we would call world music, stuff from Turkey and Spain, as well as American idiom, folk music. And then in high school, I went through a period where I did play the drums, but I never
Oh,
was in a band playing the drums.
I see.
Uh, by the time I got into a band, it was one that already had a drummer. So I had to do something else. So I returned to the keyboard. I got an electric organ and formed with friends a trio, which was no guitar. It was keyboard, bass, and drums. And then that sort of went far until I got into, well, high school ended and I went to Cal Arts, and that's where I really started pursuing electronic music because they had three electronic music studios there. Morton Subotnick was the head of the department, and that kind of got me off to a good start in that particular direction. And that was reinforced by the job that I had, a work study job in college that exposed me to a lot of different kinds of music because it was in the music library, and my job was transferring all the LP records onto tape as a kind of archive backup. And so I got exposed to a lot of different music that way too.
Wow. At that point, was it possible to use any of it as sound sources for your own music?
I began to experiment in the studio. I was captivated by some of the records that I heard in the music library, music of the Aka Pygmies, field recordings that were made and issued, I think, on the UNESCO label. And there were those songs really moved me. And so I began to experiment with tape. And in those days it was a pre-digital world. We're talking 1973, 1974. So working with tape, with loops, with mixing techniques like that is when I started to kind of fool around with the idea of sampling. And it wasn't until I had no longer had access to an electronic music studio that had a synthesis capability. I no longer had access because I graduated from Cal Arts, and I found myself in a job at a radio station which had tape recorders and which had microphones and had turntables and a big music library, but didn't have a synthesizer. So then the challenge was how to make music in that studio with the means at my disposal. A breakout piece that I had back in 1977, I guess it was a piece called Sukhothai, which involved taking kind of semi-arbitrarily a recording from the music library, Igor Kipnis playing the Rondo from Abdelazer by Henry Purcell. Everyone knows the theme if they don't know the piece itself, because it's what Benjamin Britten used in his Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra. And I took that recording and I figured out a way to, through a process of overdubbing, take one recording of a harpsichord. And then you hear 2, and then you hear 4, and then you hear 8 and 16, all the way up to 1024 of these harpsichords playing simultaneously. And the development from the 1 all the way up to the 1024 was really interesting. The gradual transformation that happened each time I added a generational layer. And so that's really what kind of got me started thinking about this idea of using even familiar musical material that where an audience would hear it and have some kind of identity in their minds, but then it becomes something completely and utterly different, and so there's an element of surprise and wonder and so on.
So, was there any way to duplicate that for live performance?
In those days, live performance was hitting the play button
Yeah.
on a tape recorder and listening to it along with the audience on speakers, which wasn't, I mean, that was okay, but it wasn't really that interesting for me to have something that was completely fixed as an object. So I started to do performances involving multiple cassette machines and a digital delay, and then eventually actually adapted using a turntable with a stack of records feeding into a sophisticated digital delay harmonizer. And I continued on this path performing
Mm-hmm.
for a number of years until all my equipment got stolen, at which point I took the insurance check and invested in a completely different system and a completely different approach, even though I was still interested in using samples.
So, have you ever used a turntable since then?
No, I pretty much abandoned using a turntable on stage around 1986, which was when I got my first Apple Macintosh, and I got a sampler, and I got a synthesizer, and these could all talk to each other using what was then a relatively new protocol called MIDI that everyone knows today. But at the beginning, it was kind of computer Esperanto, allowing instruments from different manufacturers and computer to talk to each other. And so using MIDI, I put my turntable into storage where it remained for the next 30 years or so.
So, do you want to speak a little bit about the piece Tucked In?
Well, Tucked In is an example of a type of music and a type of process that I use. I've always been interested in sort of recontextualizing music with other music, combining different musics that may be very different in character, maybe very different in origin, maybe have different cultural originations, and somehow making them work. And of course, in the standard mashup approach that DJs have been using for decades, it's a question of playing two things and having them somehow mesh, but you're basically combining them by layering them one over the other or intermixing them together. I was differently interested. I've been interested in a different way of combining them, where you actually use the shape of one piece of music and infuse it with the spectra, kind of the internal information of a different piece of music going into that shape. It's almost like the metaphor of molding, like plastic molding or injection molding, where you inject the spectrum of one sound into the overall form or shape of another. So in Tucked In, what you hear in the beginning is a kind of guitar solo that open in the beginning. It's sort of sporadic, and then it opens up. And then over the course of the next few minutes, what happens is the guitar and the other instruments in the one recording become infused with the spectra of some what's actually Baroque music, different. And it sort of takes over almost like a parasite gnawing away at its host until finally the other music sort of wins.
Great. Well, this is a live recording from Roulette.
Yeah, this was made at Roulette in Brooklyn, New York City. Recording that was made in December as part of, it was actually the concerts in New York were the last in a series of uh, celebrations of my dotage. As I turned 70 this year, I started to reflect back and organized a number of events in different cities. And Roulette being the final one, we had a chance to play Tucked In as part of it.
Good. Well, thank you, Carl. It's been great talking to you, and I learned some. I've known you all these years, and I never knew you were a drummer.
Oh, few people do.
Okay. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you.
Here we
Fun
go
time.
to Tucked In. Welcome, Jessie Cox, and thank you for being a part of the Composers Curator series.
Thank you, Annie, for having me, and to Composers Now for creating this series.
So, Jessie, you're going to be presenting two pieces today. What are their titles?
Yeah, so I'm going to be presenting a string quartet. It's called Conscious Music, and then a percussion solo for augmented reality score, which is titled The Immortal.
Great. So I listened to the string quartet, and it's really beautiful work. And one thing that I found really striking was that you're working with these unorthodox sounds and extended techniques, but there's such a beautiful sense of orchestration and like a textural arc. I was wondering if your background actually being so diverse and including study of drums, working with so many unorthodox sounds, and more conventional study of classical music, how these elements came together to write this beautiful piece.
Thank you very much for the kind words, Annie. I mean, yeah, so the piece, I'm working with prepared strings. I have a couple of preparations that I developed with a friend during my time at Berklee College of Music, actually, so a little while ago. It includes a rubber band, a twist tie, and a regular twine string. So quite common objects, but what they allow is that I can change the sound of each string to be something like ring modulated. And my idea was not just to have new timbres, but also to devise new ideas of gesture and pitch and harmony and so forth. So I developed all my material, my language, that is pitch language, rhythmic language, gestural language, and even the interplay between musicians, partly from this new partly from this new transformation of the instrument, so which suggests me new things. And I kind of like that you drew this in connection with my my practice as a drummer. I think it does have some relation in terms of the drum set as an assemblage being also kind of like a way to interact with something that can be repositioned, and then when I do that, completely new gestures become available because my body relates to the instrument in a different way. But also in terms of sound, so the way that a cymbal, for example, behaves compared to a string, and the way that that suggests very different ways of working, gesturing, and so forth. Yeah, so it's definitely part of why I developed it this way. Yeah.
I think also you mentioned a drum set. So there's
Yeah.
also polyphony that not every violinist, if you're a wind player, you wouldn't necessarily have that. And rhythmic complexity as well. So
Yeah.
you mentioned a ring modulator.
Yeah. Yes. So basically, if one puts this small string or the small rubber band around the main violin string or cello string, then it acts like a second finger. So you have almost like two notes on the same string, and they interact with each other and produce what a ring modulator produces. So that the ring modulator, of course, relates beautifully to your and then the movement, yeah, of the drums. Actually, the reason why I wanted to play drums was because of the movement. I still see the image. When I was 6 years old, I saw the first time live a drummer, and very close in the same room without stage. And so the movement of all the limbs is what really drew me to this instrument, and how there could be all these different, I guess, multiple voices at the same time from one person. Yeah.
So you found your calling as a drummer young.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the drums have been calling me for a long time. That's right.
And you were going to say something also about the rhythmic complexity coming from being a percussionist and drummer.
Oh yeah. So I think so part of my rhythmic language has to do with the relationship between bodies, I guess. That is, again, I am sitting on the drums, and then I move, and my limbs move in different ways. And that has automatically, of course, rhythmic complexities and language, something like dancing, but I can dance in very different ways and create very different types of movement. I really love, like, maybe this is a good analogy or to explain it. I mean, we talk a lot about Marshall Allen, the great alto saxophonist from the Sonora Orchestra and current director of the group, and how Marshall Allen plays the saxophone. He makes these unique movements with his hand across the saxophone when he plays, and then, of course, come out the unique Marshall Allen sounds. But to me, this is kind of what I mean with, I guess, unusual ways of dancing, or also positions in relation to the instrument. So for me, that's how I think about, I guess, not both rhythm and sound, because it also brings other sounds out, especially in the drums, which, if I touch it in a certain way or go across it in a certain way, it brings out other rhythms than if I go straight, right? So if I start changing or shape shifting my own body or the body of the instrument, new sounds and new rhythms and gestures and interactions appear. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's see an example of this piece.
Beautiful.
Great piece. Thank you, Jesse. So do you want to give us a little introduction into your next piece?
Yes, I would love to do that. So the next piece you will hear is a piece for solo percussion, and it uses a unique setup. So I have a cymbal on a cymbal stand connected with a regular string to a drum. In this case, it was a bass drum. And this works basically like a cup telephone. So like when you have two cups and the string.
Oh, a cup telephone. I see.
Yeah. So the children's toy. And the vibrations go from the cymbal to the bass drum and are amplified or resonate in the bass drum. But of course, there's also some coming back again. So that's the basic setup. And then the percussionist, they play the cymbal with a bow and a meditation bowl. The meditation bowl is a way to make notes on the cymbal. So different multiphonics and sounds and pitches can emerge from the same cymbal. And so to write the score for this piece, I wanted to use a method that fits with this, I guess, setup very well. And I also wanted to try this out. I created an augmented reality score. So what I did is I wrote a software for the phone, and it has symbols for where you have your bow and where you have your meditation bowl and where the symbol is. And then you place the phone between yourself and the symbol. And then you look through the phone and you follow the graphic for the different positions and to make these different multiphonics and so forth. So the piece has basically a circle, which is the placement for the meditation bowl. There's some text instructions as to how exactly to connect. Most of the time it's just with the edge, and then there is just a green long block, and it goes up and down, and it moves up and down. This indicates the angle of the bow and the position of the bow.
Did I see you using this technique with the Sun Ra Orchestra?
That's correct. Yes, I did. I think I used the meditation bowl too, but there I used many more drums. So this is the piece you're referring to, is a piece I created, commissioned by the Parfum Foundation at Harvard for the Sun Ra Orchestra and some of my collaborators.
But I love the way you could transfer this in a commission for somebody else.
Yeah, it was so great to work with Anita Cappuccinelli, who plays this recording, and she found a whole lot of unique sounds because each cymbal is different, each drum is different, each relationship between cymbal and drum and how you tune the drum and the room is all different. And I really love what she did with the piece. She found such unique sounds.
And how do you feel it augments reality?
That's a wonderful question, actually. So not only the score, but the sound also augments reality. That's true, because I've been doing a lot of pieces where I use the cymbal as a virtual acoustic environment. And in fact, for the Sun Ra Orchestra piece, as well as for this piece, I created a 3D score which has different planets, and musicians travel to these planets playing those. Or sometimes I create even different spaces musicians travel to, so they actually change the sound of their instrument. So yeah.
Good. Well, let's listen. Thank you, Jesse. It's really great having you here.
Thank you, Annie, very much for the invitation and to Composers Now for creating this series.
The one last thing I'd like to mention is if you can speak for a moment about the book Composing While Black and your participation in it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So Composing While Black is a book edited by Harold Kisidu and George Lewis, and it documents Black composers and compositional practices and works from pretty much across the globe. And my contribution was a chapter on Swiss-Nigerian composer Charles Usor, specifically on his cycle Mother Tongue. And I also got to aid in translating because the book is actually published in both English and German.
Good. Well, I really look forward to reading it. We'll have links to your pieces so people can hear the whole thing. And thank you again to Composers Now, and thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Annie.
Welcome, Teresa Wong.
Hi, Annie. It's great to be here.
Great to see you. Thanks for sharing a little bit about your work.
Yes.
So to start off, do you want to talk a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I grew up playing classical piano and cello and was really intensely involved in music. But when I got to college, I was wanting to explore other things and ended up studying design. So I was working in design for many years and then was exposed to experimental music while I was living abroad in Italy. And that's where these two worlds, like the design world and music, although classical, kind of made sense to me as an artistic path forward, as like a creative path. So as a composer, as a cellist, a lot of my work is influenced by design, but in the way that my design practice and education was based on looking at form and looking at processes and trying to reinvent things and question things and come up with new ways of doing things. And so that's sort of how I came to do what I do now with music.
Music appealed to you more in its more experimental forms?
Right. So I just having studied so much classical music growing up, I did not see myself going into just being a classical musician in a more traditional sense. And I wasn't even aware of this whole world of creative music, of avant-garde music, until later in my life. And so that's it. I guess it made sense when I saw that those two worlds could come together.
So it's kind of like it found you as
I
much
guess
as you found it.
Yeah, yeah.
So the first piece that we're going to listen and watch by you does have a very strong visual component. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the circumstances in which you created it.
Right. So As We Breathe was commissioned in the winter of 2020 by Long Beach Opera. And it was a project that you were also a part of, where several mentors invited several younger artists to create pieces for their online gala. And so because it was the lockdown, these pieces were premiered online in film format or video format. And I took that opportunity as sort of the perfect nudge I needed to realize something that I had been thinking about for many years I just called them like installed songs.
Mm-hmm.
So I've done a lot of songwriting and song making in my work through the years. And again, looking at it as like a designer, thinking, well, what can a song be besides playing with the form and what I've done a lot, in structure of the music or lyrics or how to use text, what instrumentation. But this was a way to take it to another level of using sculpture, using video, using collaging. And so this piece was created with baritone David Castillo, based in LA. And he filmed himself. We had sort of an online recording session where he filmed himself recording several parts that I had composed. And then he sent me all that footage. And then I collaged it and added other visual components, kind of based around the wildfires in California, the death of George Floyd and all the Black Lives Matter, protests, and also COVID. I mean, these were just all the, things kind of colliding at the moment in my consciousness, everyone's consciousness. And so then the piece, and I also recorded myself playing some koto. And the reason I used the koto was because it was written in just intonation. And I wanted to just experiment with pre-tuning an instrument that, I didn't have to find all the pitches for. So that footage again was collaged and then projected on a paper sculpture that I had made and filmed again. So what you see in this final piece is just these multiple layers and multiple, realities kind of flattened into one video. But I just feel there's something that resonates with just having all these like dimensions to it.
So did you write all of the different vocal parts to interlock in a certain way? Like, did he record it with a click track or was it more free?
So that's a great question. So I don't think we used a click track because my intention was there were these kind of modules. So he might just sing like the first phrase, I breathe the air you breathe. And then I would give him a specific pitch, but I asked him to sing it, in a certain organic way, to repeat it. And then also to play with the way he delivered it. So using different voices, using different affects of his own voice. And then I collaged it in Pro Tools. So that was kind of part of the composition process, not to have it strictly notated on a timeline.
So did you play with where the tracks went much?
Yeah. I mean, not.
So you not your basic materials and then built it to a certain degree.
Right.
It's funny because it's such an organic whole. I wouldn't have necessarily guessed that.
Yeah.
The one thing that did strike me is the koto part sounds kind of improvised. So obviously you couldn't be playing with him as there are 8 voices, but it's I like the way it's very responsive.
It is, in fact, pretty improvised. And so I believe what I did, it's been a while now, but I collaged his vocal part in Pro Tools. And so I had the basic structure of the whole piece. And then I recorded myself on the koto and basically, as a structured improvisation. So I knew a few things. I knew which pitches I tuned the koto to, and I would only use certain strings in certain sections. So it kind of had this harmonic progression. And then I also kind of sketched out roughly like what techniques I would use. So like the beginning, it starts with some drumsticks, and then later it goes into plucking. So, there are these kind of rough guidelines, but within it, it is very much improvised.
Wow. Well, thank you. Let's listen.
All right.
I breathe the air you breathe. They breathe the air you breathe. I breathe the air you breathe. They breathe the air you breathe. She breathes. boy dreams he is a man. Evil dreams, it passes unnoticed. And goodness, that it plays a hand and will. I breathe the air you breathe. I breathe the air you breathe. Breathe the air you breathe. I breathe the air you breathe. To dreams it is already a deep sea, and the golden sea that it is approaching, and they breathe the air I breathe, air you root tree, it is a branch that a bird makes its nest in it, and the cloud that it is already red. I breathe the air and seeping the fresh asperity of grass. I breathe, they breathe the air he breathes.
One thing I wanted to add too, because it's maybe not obvious, but the fact that the image is moving, it's projection on paper that's just moving from air. So it looks sort of like it's been digitally manipulated, but it's really not.
Yeah.
Like the video's been edited, but what I love with this kind of sculpture is that it's in space. And what I would ideally love to do is show works like this in an actual physical space where you're seeing the sculpture, you're seeing the movement, you're seeing this piece as a three-dimensional object.
So like an exhibit where you have several songs.
Yeah, that's an idea that I'm working on right now as an opera, basically.
Wow, what a great idea.
Thank you.
So I also wanted to talk about the fluency of trees, because this shows your process as a performer and a solo performer. And maybe you can talk a little bit about using your voice and using the cello and how it affects not just this piece, but your other work.
Yeah, so when I started to come back into music and as a designer, I was just really drawn to the cello versus the piano, which I studied a lot growing up, because just the tactility and the closeness of the string and the wood and the object of the cello, and it was just, it's so part of your body, and also began to use my voice at that time. So this piece is a result of many years of just researching and developing a personal vocabulary. And I'm combining some texts that I've written about memories of trees, and I'm combining Cantonese and Italian, two languages that I speak that I feel very close to. And I feel what's really fun is about languages in general is just that the differences of sound and sound quality that each language contains. And when you abstract those sounds, how they have a meaning, even if you don't know what it is, they convey something. And that ties to this theme of trees, like the sentience of things, the sentience of, the natural world around us and the sounds that we hear everywhere.
You identify with trees? I'm curious because I know it's part of your email address for many years.
Yeah, it's funny. It's just a nickname I've had since I was about 10. My best friend just started calling me Tree. And as a kid, I've always loved trees, and I feel some, just a connection with that. And so as a cellist, my research is sort of in this viewpoint of like, if I looked at this object as a piece of wood or just as a piece of a tree, it was part of several trees. What would those trees want to be saying, or what are they saying? I mean, there's like sentience in these, beautiful plant lives. And so, taking the cultural, taking the history, taking the tradition away, what would I do with this material? I started to just play. And I realized that, I had just this affinity and a capacity for improvising.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of this. It's been great. I've learned a little bit about your music as well in these few minutes we've had to talk, and I look forward to listening and learning more about your work.
Thanks so much for having me, Annie.
Thank you, Teresa.
Non ho visto la tua barca più su. C'era un albero di olive, anche due uccelli. Io都雀仔喺個電話線度坐緊，心，a noi piumaggio variopinto. C'erano nero,黑色, azzurro, lam색, verde anche luxic, e anche arancione, ciansec.